I sent that cruel message. The kind of message that cuts deep, that leaves no room for doubt, burns like alcohol on an open wound. They were together. I knew that. She wasn't at a friend's house, as she had put it with her usual blandness while adjusting her hair in front of the hallway mirror. No, this time, his excuses didn't hold water, and I had proof. The location on her cell phone gave everything away. It was his house. As I wrote each word of that message, my mind imagined them. Accomplice laughter, furtive touches, looks that she once kept just for me. My anger was an erupting volcano, and the words, the lava that flowed mercilessly, I know everything. Make the most of this night, because it will be the last night you spend peacefully. I sent. And then I waited. My heart hammered in my chest, the seconds dragged by like hours. For a moment, courage gave way to fear. Had I exaggerated? Would she laugh alongside him, dismissing my attempt at confrontation? But that thought soon dissipated. No. She knew what I was capable of. The only certainty was that this message would change everything. The answer came faster than I expected, but not in the way I imagined. First, absolute silence. Then, a call from her, rejected by me without hesitation. Soon after, an audio. The voice that had once been my refuge now carried despair. Please, we need to talk. Not like that. Let me explain. Explain what? That every innocent trip to the market turned into a clandestine meeting? That the deleted messages on the cell phone were something that I wouldn't understand? As I listened, my anger was mixed with almost physical pain. What else could she justify? How do you explain betrayal? But what tormented me most wasn't her. It was him. Who was this man who dared to invade the space we built together? How dare he take what was mine? It didn't take long for me to find out. Social networks deliver more than we would like, and his was an open book. Smiling photos, the expensive car in the garage, the perfect life designed to impress. And then, the shock, a woman at his side in several of the images. She wasn't just my traitor. He was hers too. The impact of this discovery hit me like a punch in the stomach. I didn't know whether to laugh at the irony or sink further into the abyss of resentment. Now, everything made sense. The secret meetings, the furtive glances in public, her hesitation in sharing everyday details. She wasn't just cheating on me, I was living a parallel life, a lie built on top of other lies. And he was an accomplice. My hands shook as I clutched the phone, images of them together jumping off the screen like a direct insult. At that moment, my only desire was revenge. Not silent or calculated revenge. I wanted something they would never forget. Little by little, my plan began to take shape. It wouldn't be vulgar or impulsive. It would be something surgical, which would force them to face the consequences of their choices. But most of all, I needed them both to feel the weight of betrayal, exactly as I was feeling at that moment. He has a wife, I muttered to myself, repeating the phrase like a mantra. This revelation, more than anything, gave me strength. It wouldn't just be my life that would be turned upside down. He would also face chaos. But how to expose this in a way that they couldn't escape? At that moment, my phone vibrated again. Another message from her. Please don't do anything hasty. We can resolve this. I love you. Do I love you? What did those words mean now? That was what tormented me. How could someone who claimed to love cheat so blatantly? Did love mean nothing anymore? Every shared memory now seemed like an elaborate hoax. And the irony of all this? While I was facing this avalanche of emotions, they were together, probably discussing how to erase the traces of betrayal. But I was one step ahead. There would be no escape. The night wore on, and I could imagine them receiving another message. This time, a link with photos of him and his wife, scenes that I knew would be easily understood. A short sentence accompanied the submission, "What now? How is it?" I could almost hear the desperate whispers between them. Maybe she would cry. Maybe he swore he would control the situation. But what they didn't know was that this was just the beginning. Because, deep down, this story wasn't just about me. It was about the choices we make and the webs we weave with them. And as I watched my phone vibrate once again with notifications from them, a single question echoed in my mind: how far are we willing to go to protect what we love or to destroy what has hurt us? Despair was setting in, both for them and for me. And now, I just wanted to see where the truth would take them, and what would be left of us when it all came out. Welcome to our channel. Here, we make it clear, we never support or encourage any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, created to show how betrayal can destroy lives, homes, and trust. Our goal is to reflect on the consequences of wrong choices and how they profoundly affect everyone involved. Get ready now for a shocking story, full of twists and intense emotions. Happy listening. Daniel has always been a meticulous man. He was the type to sort his socks by color and double-check that the house alarm was on before going to bed. At age 39, he had a solid career as a civil engineer and an impeccable reputation at work and among friends. With a calm presence and restrained smile, he was known for his almost infinite patience, a characteristic that earned him the respect of everyone around him. But it was in his marriage to Clara that he really found his balance. Clara, aged 35, was the complete opposite of Daniel. Where he was restrained, she was spontaneous. He loved art, especially painting, and spent hours in the improvised studio on the second floor of the house, getting lost in brushstrokes and vibrant colors. Despite their distinct personalities, the two formed an admired couple. Friends always said that they completed each other, and Daniel liked to believe that. Every little gesture from Clara felt like a constant reminder of why he had fallen in love with her. The house they shared was an extension of their life together. With neutral tones and carefully chosen decor, it reflected Daniel's practical style, but there were clear touches of Clara's vibrant energy: paintings painted by herself, plants scattered throughout the corners and small ceramic vases that she had collected since she was a teenager. For Daniel, that house wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a refuge, a symbol of what he believed to be a perfectly balanced life. Mornings were always hurried. Daniel left for work early, usually after a cup of coffee and a few quick words with Clara as she rummaged through drawers looking for a specific brush or car keys. "Are you going to paint today?" he asked. And she smiled, with the almost automatic response, "Whenever time allows." That smile, the way her eyes sparkled for a brief moment, was enough to warm Daniel's day. Clara also had her rituals. He loved walking in the park at dusk and said that the movement of the trees inspired his ideas. There was always something about her that seemed ephemeral, as if she were present but at the same time lost in distant thoughts. Daniel admired that about her, although sometimes he wondered if Clara's inner world wasn't a place he would never have access to. Together for 12 years, they shared many happy moments and overcame the ups and downs common to any relationship. What Daniel didn't know, or perhaps didn't want to admit, was that Clara seemed increasingly distant in recent months. He noticed how often she checked her phone, how she smiled at the screen and then quickly covered it up. He thought it was strange, but he always found justifications for himself. Maybe she was just sharing ideas with other people in the artistic world or watching something inspiring. There was no reason to be suspicious. After all, trust was the foundation of their relationship. Clara, on the other hand, struggled with feelings that even she couldn't name. "I loved Daniel, or at least I believed I did. He was kind, trustworthy and always made a point of showing how much he loved her. However, sometimes she felt like she was living in a routine that trapped her. It wasn't about Daniel, it was about her. About what he felt he had lost along the way, the passion, the intensity, something that seemed essential, but that had escaped his hands for a long time. The studio was his escape. There, alone, she immersed herself in colors as if they were the only way to express the turmoil she carried within her. The walls were full of unfinished paintings, each one telling a story that Clara didn't know how to finish. Even so, she felt that something was changing, an uneasiness that she couldn't explain even to herself. Daniel began to notice these changes in a subtle way. Clara talked less about her projects, and dinners that were previously full of laughter and stories now felt like long silences and averted gazes. He tried to compensate by organizing little surprises, like flowers on a random Wednesday or invitations to trips she always said she wanted to go on. "You don't have to try so hard," Clara once said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He didn't know how to interpret that. Could it be tiredness? Or something else? On quiet nights, when Clara finally came down from the studio and sat next to him on the couch, Daniel clung to those moments like an anchor. She still held his hand, still laughed at his jokes, but something seemed different. He tried to talk, but her answers were vague, always pointing to work or tiredness. "I'm fine, just busy," was what she said. Daniel chose to believe. But the distance between them was not just a matter of perception. Clara felt it too. He felt the weight of expectations, routine, and a relationship that, although solid, no longer brought the same sparkle in his eyes as before. In the midst of this, doubts arose that consumed her. What did she really want? Could Daniel, with all his love and patience, be enough to fill the emptiness growing inside her? The days continued with this silent dance between the two, each immersed in their own thoughts, trying, in their own way, to maintain the stability that both had built. For Daniel, the certainty that Clara was the love of his life was never questioned. For Clara, the future seemed like an unknown, a puzzle where no piece seemed to fit. While Clara painted in her studio that afternoon, lost in lines that seemed to lead nowhere, Daniel drove home, looking forward to a peaceful night. He had decided to prepare Clara's favorite dish, an attempt to rekindle what seemed to be fading between them. He had bought wine, lit candles and even had music chosen to play in the background. For him, small gestures were always a way of showing how much he cared. As he parked in the garage, Daniel looked at Clara's studio. The lights were on, and he felt a comforting warmth knowing she was there. That space was almost sacred to her, and he respected that. He went up the stairs slowly, with a slight smile on his lips, already imagining the surprise Clara would have when she came down and found everything prepared. What Daniel didn't know was that, at that exact moment, Clara was thinking about what her life would be like if she had made other decisions. If, perhaps, the comfort of what they built wasn't enough to suffocate the restlessness that consumed her. She was one step away from something that could change everything, but she still didn't know how or when to take that step. All he knew was that the emptiness he felt seemed to be growing, slowly swallowing the vibrant colors he used to paint his life with. The night promised to be another one of those that both would live in silence, each trying to find a point of connection. But, at that moment, destiny was already beginning to chart a different path, a path that would lead them to face truths that they both feared facing. The days seemed to drag on for Daniel. The little routines that once brought comfort now became painful reminders that something was wrong. Clara continued to smile, but her gaze didn't meet his with the same intensity. She was there, but at the same time absent, like a reflection in a glass that can never be reached. Daniel wondered if it was just his imagination, if it was accumulated tiredness or some reflection of his own insecurity. On the other hand, Clara felt the pressure of silence. There were times when she tried to return Daniel's kindnesses, forcing a closeness that didn't come naturally. She would find herself smiling mechanically during dinner or holding your hand without really feeling the warmth like before. The emptiness she carried seemed more intense every day, and it scared her. That week, Daniel decided something different. He had heard about an art exhibition in the neighboring town, and thought it would be the kind of thing Clara would enjoy. An escape for both of us, he thought, trying to bring some lightness to both of them. When telling the idea at dinner, Clara hesitated. "I think I'm a little overwhelmed with my paintings." Maybe I should stay home and rest. Daniel insisted, saying that the event could inspire her. Who knows, you might find new ideas for your paintings. She nodded with a hesitant smile, but her expression seemed more tired than excited. On the day of the exhibition, Clara prepared slowly, as if something was holding her back. She wore a simple but elegant dress that Daniel always praised, and wore earrings that he had given her for her birthday. When she got into the car, Daniel greeted her with a kind compliment. "You look beautiful." Clara smiled, but her gaze remained distant. The exhibition was vibrant, full of contemporary works that mixed bold techniques and concepts. Daniel watched her from afar as Clara moved through the corridors, stopping every now and then to admire a piece. He thought it was working. She seemed immersed, at least for a moment. He approached, commenting on one of the paintings, and she responded politely but without enthusiasm. Despite this, Daniel felt hopeful. When they returned home, Clara thanked her for the night, but said she was tired and would go up to the studio. Daniel agreed, understanding that her space was needed. He spent the next few hours on the couch, with the television on, but not paying attention to what was on. His thoughts were on Clara, in the distance that seemed impossible to cross. While Daniel was lost in his reflections, Clara was going up the stairs with her cell phone in her hand. In the studio, he sat in the armchair near the window and stared at the screen. There were recent messages, a conversation she knew she shouldn't have started, but which had somehow become impossible to avoid. With each touch of the screen, I felt a mixture of guilt and excitement, as if I were about to cross a line of no return. The following days were a repetition of this pattern. Daniel struggled to find ways to connect, while Clara seemed to sink deeper and deeper into her own thoughts. The nights in the studio became longer, and the excuses of tiredness became more frequent. Daniel began to notice patterns, small details that he previously ignored, messages on her cell phone that she quickly hid, phone calls that she said were from friends, but that ended with a discreet smile. One day, while Clara was away, Daniel found her cell phone on the studio table. He hesitated for a moment. He had never invaded her privacy before, and doing so now felt like a betrayal of the trust that had always been the foundation of their relationship. But something inside him pushed him away. He took out his cell phone and opened the messages. What he saw made him freeze. There were exchanges of messages that left no doubt. Clara was involved in something that went beyond simple friendship. The texts were intimate, full of innuendo and veiled promises. Daniel felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He closed his cell phone and put it back in the same place, but the words he had read continued to echo in his mind. When Clara returned home that night, Daniel tried to act normal. He knew that confronting her at that moment would be pointless. I needed time to process, to understand what to do next. Dinner was silent, with both of them avoiding eye contact. Clara seemed oblivious to Daniel's concern, too busy with her own thoughts. In the days that followed, Daniel began to observe Clara more closely. Every movement, every word, everything felt like a piece of a puzzle he was desperately trying to put together. He didn't know who the other man was, but he knew he needed to find out. The idea that Clara could be sharing her life, her secrets, her intimacy with someone outside of her marriage consumed him. One night, while Clara was in the shower, Daniel searched the studio for clues. He found a card that looked out of place among the painting supplies. It was from a restaurant. There was nothing written on it, but Daniel recognized it. It was a place he and Clara had never visited together. He kept the card in his pocket and decided to go there the next day. When he arrived at the restaurant, Daniel sat at the bar and ordered a drink. He looked around, trying to find something that looked familiar. Then he noticed a photo on the wall. It was from a recent event, with several people posing in front of the restaurant. And there was Clara, next to a man he didn't recognize. She was smiling, the kind of smile he hadn't seen in months. Daniel returned home that night not knowing what to do. He felt betrayed, but also lost. Clara was the love of his life. How could something like this happen? What had he done wrong? As these questions tormented him, he decided he could wait no longer. He needed to confront her, but he would do it at the right time, in a way that she couldn't deny. That same night, while Clara was back in the studio, Daniel sent a message. Not for her, but for the man. A short, direct, but devastating text. He knew that once he hit send, there was no turning back. I was prepared for whatever came next. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel waited, his heart racing, knowing the confrontation was inevitable. And as he prepared to face Clara, he knew that the impact of what he had discovered was just the beginning of something much bigger. What he didn't expect was that the next step would reveal secrets that would change everything, in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Daniel walked down the hallway of the house, each step echoing in his mind as a reminder of what was about to happen. The tension was almost palpable, an electric current that coursed through the air as he climbed the stairs towards Clara's studio. His hands were shaking slightly, but he knew he couldn't hesitate. It was time to confront her, to get out the truth she had been hiding. Clara was sitting in her usual chair, a brush in one hand and her cell phone in the other. She looked at the screen with a smile that Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. Hearing his footsteps, she turned quickly, trying to hide her discomfort. "Hey love. You went up early today," he said, his voice slightly trembling. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to control the anger and despair that was bubbling inside him. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. His voice was firm, but filled with an emotion that Clara immediately recognized as different. Something in his eyes made her drop her brush and cell phone on the table. "About what?" he asked, his expression a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. "About us. About what you've been doing. And about what I discovered." He crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on her, waiting for any sign that she might try to escape the confrontation. Clara hesitated, her face closing like a defensive barrier. "What are you talking about, Daniel? I don't understand." "You think I don't know?" he shot back, his voice getting louder. "The messages, the apologies. Do you think I didn't notice? I know about him." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara looked away, her lips tightening as if she was trying to hold back the words that wanted to come out. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh, like someone who had been cornered. "You don't understand, then make me understand," he shouted, his patience running out. "Because, until now, all I see is that you were cheating on the man who loves you more than anything." Clara looked at him, her eyes full of tears, but not regret. There was something else there, something Daniel couldn't identify. "I didn't want it to be like this, Daniel. I never wanted to hurt you." "And yet you did it," he replied, his voice now lower but filled with pain. "Who is he, Clara? And why does he mean so much to you?" She hesitated again, as if choosing her words carefully. "He is someone I met by chance. But it's not like you think, Daniel. It's not just about him." "Then tell me what it is," he insisted, his frustration rising. "Tell me why you decided to throw away everything we built." Clara stood up, crossing her arms as if trying to protect herself from his words. "I've felt lost for months, Daniel. As if something inside me was missing. He was an escape, but it's not what you think. I don't love him. I never loved him." "Then why the hell did you do that?" He moved closer to her, his voice now a husky whisper. "If it wasn't love, then what was it?" Clara hung her head, tears finally streaming down her cheeks. "Because he made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about you. It was about me. About what I stopped being." Daniel shook his head, taking a few steps back. "You stopped being you because you chose that, Clara. Not because of me." She looked up, her expression now firmer, as if she was gathering her courage. "And you? Have you ever felt that our life has become a routine, Daniel?" That you were always so worried about being perfect, about controlling everything, that you ended up forgetting what really matters. He laughed, but not in a happy way. It was a bitter laugh, full of hurt. Are you really trying to justify your betrayal by saying I cared too much? This is unbelievable. Before she could respond, Clara's phone vibrated on the table. They both looked at the device, the name flashing on the screen being the final confirmation. Daniel reached out, grabbing his cell phone before she could reach it. He opened the message that had just arrived. The words on the screen were like a punch in the gut. I can't hide it anymore. She needs to know. Daniel looked at Clara, his expression now a mixture of anger and confusion. She who? He asked, his voice cold. Clara tried to grab the phone, but Daniel held on tight. Tell me now, Clara. Who needs to know what? She took a step back, her face pale as a ghost. Daniel, please. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, he shouted, his voice echoing off the studio walls. Clara closed her eyes, as if she were trying to gather her courage for what came next. He has a wife, Daniel. He's married. For a moment, Daniel was silent, trying to process what he had just heard. Then he took a step back, shaking his head in disbelief. So you weren't just cheating on me. You were helping him cheat on someone else. This is even worse, Clara. I know, she cried, her tears now out of control. I know it was a mistake, but I didn't know at first. And when I found out, I was already too involved. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions he felt. And now? What do you think will happen? Do you think you can just erase this and go back to our lives like nothing happened? Clara didn't respond. She knew there was nothing she could say to fix what had been broken. But as Daniel looked at her, something inside him changed. He realized that, as much as the betrayal had destroyed him, the truth Clara had revealed was just the beginning. The true impact of that night was yet to come, and he wasn't ready to face what came next. Daniel was standing in the middle of the studio, trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle that Clara had revealed. The words still echoed in his mind, loaded with implications he couldn't ignore. The man wasn't just any lover. He also had a wife, someone who, like him, was being cheated on. Daniel felt the weight of it all like a stone crushing his chest. He needed to get out of that suffocating environment. Without saying anything else, he left Clara's cell phone on the table and went downstairs. Clara followed him, hesitantly, calling his name. Daniel, wait. Please listen to me. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, turning to face her with a steady gaze. Listen to what, Clara? More excuses. More justifications for something that has no explanation. His voice was a mix of anger and pain, carried with an intensity she had never seen before. I'm not trying to justify myself, she replied, her eyes teary. I just want you to understand that you destroyed our lives for someone who is also lying to his wife. Daniel interrupted, his voice rising once more. Tell me, Clara, what exactly do you want me to understand? That this was a mistake. Because that's obvious. What do you regret? Because honestly, I don't even know if I believe anything you say anymore. Clara went down the last few steps, stopping close to him but keeping a safe distance. I know I messed up. I know you'll never forgive me, but I didn't know how to stop. By the time I realized what I was doing, it was too late. Daniel laughed, but not in a way that conveyed any joy. Too late. There is no such thing, Clara. You chose to continue. He chose to lie to me, to him, to her. You both made that choice. You're right, she admitted, her voice breaking. But I can't change what happened. I can only try to fix what's left. To repair. Daniel repeated in disbelief. What's left, Clara? Because honestly, it feels like you destroyed everything. He shook his head in exasperation and grabbed his car keys. I need to get out of here. Clara took a step forward, holding out her hand as if she could stop him. Please, Daniel, don't go like that. We need to talk. Talk? He replied, with the door already open. We already talked, Clara. Now I need to think. And honestly, I can't do that with you around. Without waiting for a response, Daniel left, closing the door tightly behind him. Clara stood in the hallway, feeling the emptiness grow around her. She knew she had lost him, but she still didn't know to what extent. Daniel drove aimlessly for some time, letting the silence inside the car fill the space where Clara's screams and tears still echoed in his mind. He didn't know where to go. I was tired, confused and emotionally exhausted. But there was something he needed to do. He needed to find the other man's wife. He needed to look into her eyes and share the truth that now consumed him. He pulled out his phone and looked up the address he had found days before. It was risky, but Daniel felt it was necessary. He parked in front of a modest house, with lights still on despite the late hour. For a moment he hesitated, wondering if he was about to make another mistake. But before he could reconsider, he got out of the car and rang the doorbell. The door was opened by a woman who appeared to be in her 30s, with her hair tied up in a messy bun and a curious look in her eyes. Can I help you? His voice was polite but cautious. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to gather the courage for what he was about to say. Sorry to bother you at this hour, but I think we need to talk. It's about your husband. Her expression changed immediately, curiosity giving way to concern. My husband? What happened? Can I come in? Daniel asked, trying not to sound threatening. It's something we might want to discuss calmly. She hesitated for a moment, but eventually opened the door. Daniel entered, feeling the weight of what he was about to reveal. They sat in the living room, and he began to explain, choosing his words carefully. When he finished, she was silent, her face pale and her hands shaking. Are you saying my husband is having an affair with your wife? The disbelief in her voice was evident. Daniel just nodded, not knowing what else he could say. The woman, who he now knew was Helena, was silent for a few minutes, processing the information. Finally, she spoke, her voice filled with a pain that Daniel recognized all too well. I knew something was wrong. He was so distant lately, always making excuses for everything. But I never thought that. Helena stopped, covering her face with her hands. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. As much as I was there to share her pain, I didn't want to cause any more suffering than necessary. I'm sorry, he said, his voice low. I just thought you had a right to know. Helena lowered her hands, looking at him with teary eyes. Thank you for telling me. I don't know what I'm going to do now, but thank you. Daniel nodded again, feeling that his presence there was no longer necessary. He got up, but before he could leave, Helena asked, what are you going to do? He stopped, thinking for a moment. I don't know, he answered honestly. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. Helena nodded, understanding. Well, whatever it is, I hope you find peace. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all need. Daniel left the house, feeling a little lighter, but still carrying the weight of betrayal. As he got into the car, he realized that, as much as he wanted to forget all that, reality was far from allowing that. And he knew that when he returned home, he would have to face Clara once again. When he arrived, the house was dark. Clara wasn't in the room, but Daniel knew where to find her. He climbed the stairs slowly, stopping at the studio door. She was there, sitting on the floor, surrounded by her unfinished paintings. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. You're back, she said, her voice breaking. Daniel entered the room, closing the door behind him. Yes, I'm back. But that doesn't mean everything is resolved. Clara nodded, holding back tears. I know. And even though I destroyed everything, I want you to know that I still love you. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, trying to find some spark of feeling in himself that could erase the hurt. Love is not enough, Clara. Not after all this. She didn't respond, just lowered her head, letting silence fill the space between them. Daniel knew that that conversation was just the beginning of something he still couldn't predict. The road forward would be long, but he was determined to find it, somehow. Daniel spent the night awake, sitting on the edge of the bed he once shared with Clara. The space next to him felt emptier than ever, an abyss he couldn't fill. He tried to organize his thoughts, but everything seemed like chaos. The betrayal still pulsed in his mind, but it was Helena's look, as devastated as he was, that now haunted him. There was something about sharing that pain that made him even more aware of the impact of Clara and the other man's choices. It wasn't just the two of them who had been betrayed, it was the entire foundations of two lives that were now crumbling. In the morning, he came downstairs, still wrapped in an emotional daze. Clara was in the kitchen, standing by the sink, looking out the window as if searching for something beyond what the world could offer. She turned her face away when she heard his footsteps, but said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, thicker than any argument could be. Daniel grabbed a cup of coffee but didn't sit down. Instead, he remained standing, watching her for what seemed like an eternity. "I went to her house," he said, finally, breaking the silence. Clara turned around completely, her expression scared, as if she expected the worst. "Did you go to his wife?" "Yes." He took a sip of coffee, trying to stay calm. "She deserved to know. Just like I deserve to know about you too." Clara lowered her head, tightening her arms around herself. "What did she say?" "She was devastated, Clara. Just like I was. Just as you should have predicted it would be." His voice was low, but filled with pain. "I know what I did was horrible. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if it's possible." Clara looked up, searching for some reaction on Daniel's face other than the emptiness he seemed to carry. Daniel took a deep breath, leaving the cup in the sink. "To repair. I don't even know if I want you to try to fix it. What I do know is that nothing you say will erase what happened." She stepped forward, reaching out her hand as if she could reach him. "I don't expect to erase anything. I just want you to know that I regret it, Daniel. That, as unforgivable as it was, I never wanted to hurt you." "But you hurt," he replied, taking a step back. "And it wasn't just me. You involved another person, another family, as if the lives around you too were worthless." Clara was silent, his words piercing every layer of her attempt to justify what she had done. She knew there weren't enough excuses for what she had caused, but his words were like knives, cutting off any hope of reconciliation that remained. Daniel grabbed his car keys and headed for the door. "I'm going out. I need space." "Daniel, please," she began, but he raised his hand, interrupting her. "Not now, Clara. I don't know when, but maybe I'll be ready to talk about it again someday. Today, I just need to breathe." He left, leaving her alone in the kitchen, the sound of the door echoing as an end to that conversation. Clara collapsed into the nearest chair, holding her face in her hands. The feeling that everything was falling apart around her was overwhelming, and she knew there was no turning back. While driving, Daniel found himself wandering aimlessly, until he realized he was close to Helena's house again. He parked the car a little far away, not knowing exactly why he was there. There was something comforting in the idea that she would understand what he was feeling, that they shared a similar pain. He hesitated for a few minutes before getting out of the car. Helena answered the door with a look of surprise, but also with tacit understanding. "You're back." "I didn't know where else to go," Daniel admitted with a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry for appearing like this." She gave a small smile, tired but sincere. "I don't think either of us have many answers right now, but maybe it's easier to deal with this together." The two sat in the living room, the room charged with silent tension. Helena prepared tea, more to fill the silence than out of necessity. When they finally sat down, it was she who broke the ice. "I've been thinking a lot since yesterday," he began. "About how their choices destroyed so much. Not just for us, but for themselves. And about what this means for the future." Daniel watched her, feeling an unexpected connection grow between them. "Do you think there is a future after this? For any of us?" "I don't know," Helena replied, honestly. "But I know we can't stay stuck in this forever. The pain, the anger, they have to lead somewhere. Otherwise, they consume us." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I want to overcome this, but it's like there's a wall in front of me. Every time I try to imagine what comes next, all I see is what I lost." Helena placed her hand on his, a simple gesture, but one that carried genuine comfort. "You didn't lose everything, Daniel. You still have yourself. And maybe, in time, that will be enough." They continued talking for hours, sharing bits of their lives, their stories, and the dreams that now seemed so far away. Daniel realized that, despite all the chaos, there was something comforting about being there. Helena was not just someone who understood her pain, she was someone who, in some way, was starting to show that maybe there was a way forward. When Daniel finally returned home, night had already fallen. The house was dark, but Clara was awake, waiting for him on the living room sofa. He entered quietly, trying not to wake her, but she opened her eyes as soon as he closed the door. "I didn't know if you'd come back," she said, her voice low. Daniel sat in a nearby chair, keeping his distance. "I didn't know either." They were silent for a moment before Clara spoke again. "I can't change what I did, but I want to find a way to make it hurt less. For you. For us." "I don't know if that's possible, Clara," he replied, without looking at her directly. "What you did left marks that may never disappear." Clara nodded, silent tears streaming down her face. "I just hope that one day you find something that makes you happy again. Even if it's not me." Daniel didn't respond, but something in her sincerity touched a distant corner of his heart. He knew the road forward would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to move forward. Time passed in a blur for Daniel. The weeks that followed that night were marked by an almost suffocating emptiness. The house, once full of small rituals and comfortable silences, now felt cold and hostile. Clara was still there, but they moved like strangers sharing the same space, each trapped in their own solitude. He knew that, at some point, he would need to make a decision about what to do with the marriage, but the weight of betrayal still hung over him like an impossible shadow to dispel. Clara, in turn, tried to find ways to show that she still cared. She cooked Daniel's favorite dishes, arranged the house in a way that he had always liked, but had never commented on. She knew that no matter how hard she tried, nothing would erase what she did. Evenings in the studio were now spent in silence, no longer with furtive messages but with desperate brushstrokes that seemed more like confessions than art. But something in Daniel began to change. He realized that Clara's effort was not only to redeem what she had destroyed, but also to find herself again. Still, he couldn't ignore what he felt. As much as he wanted to believe in the possibility of rebuilding something, a part of him knew it would never be the same. One day, he made a decision. He went to Clara while she was preparing dinner. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. She turned around, holding a spoon, her expression already given over to nervousness. "Of course. About what?" "About us. About what comes after this." He sat at the kitchen table, looking at her with a serious but no longer furious look. "I've been thinking a lot, and as much as I see the effort you're making, I don't think I can continue." Clara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Daniel, please don't make this decision without, I already took it, Clara." He interrupted her, leaving no room for further arguments. I need something you can't give me right now, peace. And to do that, I need to leave it all behind. I need to leave the two of us behind. She didn't try to argue anymore. The tears came silently, flowing as she slowly nodded. I understand. And as much as it destroys me, if that's what you need, I won't stop you. In the following days, Daniel began to pack his things, looking for a new place to start over. Clara helped him, silently, leaving small notes in boxes that contained memories that she knew he wouldn't open anytime soon. The divorce was decided amicably, but still, there was an inescapable sadness in every piece of paper signed. Helena, on the other hand, had taken a different approach. After she learned of her husband's betrayal, she decided to confront him directly. When he tried to deny it, she simply showed the messages Daniel had sent as proof. The man had no way to escape. You didn't just destroy our family, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. You destroyed me. But that ends here. She filed for divorce the same day. Unlike Clara, her ex-husband tried to resist, begging for forgiveness, but Helena had already made her decision. For her, there was no going back. Months later, Daniel's life began to take a new direction. He found a small, simple but comfortable apartment. He spent more time focused on work and, in his spare time, began exploring new hobbies, something he had never allowed himself before. It was on one of these occasions, in a bookstore where he was looking for something to fill his lonely nights, that he met Helena again. She was different. There was a sparkle in his eyes that hadn't been there before, an energy that seemed almost contagious. They exchanged formal greetings, but ended up talking longer than they planned. It was strange how, even after everything they had been through, there was something comforting about each other's presence. How are you? She asked, her tone genuinely interested. Better, I think. Still trying to figure out how to move forward. She smiled, nodding. I understand. I'm in this too. But I think, in a way, it all forced me to find myself again. They continued talking, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt a lightness he had forgotten existed. It wasn't passion, nor something he could define precisely. It was just the feeling that maybe there was hope. Meanwhile, Clara decided to sell the house she shared with Daniel. It was too painful to stay in a place so full of memories. He moved to a small studio in the city center, where he began to dedicate all his time to painting. His works began to attract attention, perhaps due to the emotional intensity they carried. Despite the pain, Clara found a purpose that helped her deal with the emptiness she felt. Helena's ex-husband, on the other hand, faced the consequences of his choices in a more bitter way. Without the family he took for granted, he discovered that empty promises and fleeting moments couldn't fill the void he had created in his life. He ended up alone, forced to face what he had done. Over time, Daniel and Helena began to meet more frequently. They were unpretentious meetings, a friendship that emerged from chaos and grew into something more. They were in no hurry. They both knew they were still rebuilding their lives, but for the first time, they felt like there was something real waiting for them. Clara, in turn, found a kind of peace in solitude. Her art was thriving, and even though she still missed Daniel, she knew that the greatest learning of her life was that choices have consequences, and that rebuilding herself was a daily job. Daniel and Helena, together, began to write a new chapter. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And to them, that was all that mattered. Because, in the end, the betrayals that destroyed them also gave them the chance to be reborn. Now it's up to you. What did you think of this story? We want to know your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, here, we show that betrayal is never the way to go and consequences always follow. Until next time.